Hi, and thanks for joining for this week's Facebook Live reflection for Lent from the Congregation of St. Joseph. My name is Jessica Robleski, and I am an associate with the congregation, currently working at St. Joseph Academy in Cleveland. As we begin this time, maybe just take a moment and check in with your heart. Take a breath and acknowledge anything that is on your mind or heart, particularly anything that's hurting. We acknowledge these things before God, knowing that God is with us in our joys as well as our pain. And that's really a significant message of the stories of this Holy Week. When we look ahead to the Gospels and the readings for Passion Sunday, there's so much to reflect on. And I am always fascinated and struck by the contrasts in these stories. There's the contrast between the crowd that is crowning Jesus and the same people days later who are calling for his crucifixion. We see his silence before those who accuse and mock him. We see the contrast between the disciples' words of devotion and their cowardly actions. But this most recent time I read this long, lengthy account of the Passion in Matthew's Gospel, there was a small detail that stood out to me that kind of brought to light another contrast that I hadn't really noticed before. It's in chapter 27, verse 61, and it reads simply, "Mary Magdalene and the other Mary remained sitting there, facing the tomb." So even after Jesus has been buried and Joseph has rolled the stone in front of the tomb and returned to Arimathea, the women remain. And it makes me think of the first reading from Isaiah that says, "I have set my face like flint, knowing that I shall not be put to shame because the Lord God is my help." It's a stark and moving image when you take it in. These women have been with Jesus throughout his ministry, following him, and even once he is buried, they remain there, facing the tomb. It's also a quite profound and direct contrast with the male disciples who fall asleep and scatter in Jesus' moment of need. The women are awake, keeping watch, as they have been throughout the story. Verse 35 actually tells us that at Jesus' crucifixion, when the earth shook and the rocks split, they were there along with the centurion who recognized Jesus as truly God's son. Many women were also there, looking on from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee and had ministered and provided for him. And among them was Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph. I don't think it's saying anything particularly radical to conclude that this gospel text makes an intentional point of calling any would-be follower of Jesus to imitate the men, the women, and not the men in this story. And in a church where women's voices are still excluded from leadership, it's worth acknowledging that fact in itself. But this detail also points us to the heart of the Passion story and the reason we lift up these women, which is the simple yet challenging message that God is with us in our human experiences of suffering. And we are also called to share the pain of others, to be with them compassionately in their suffering as God is with us in ours, and as the women were with Jesus in and beyond his suffering and death. It is always tempting to turn away from suffering, even our own. It can be so overwhelming, and we can feel so helpless and so hopeless when we think about victims of gun violence, climate refugees, those experiencing homelessness, or those whose loved ones struggle with addiction or mental illness. And yet, in these readings and stories, we see that Jesus did not consider comfort and power and privilege something to be grasped, but rather emptied himself, taking on our human condition, including our suffering. In the female disciples, we see what it looks like to remain steadfast in the face of another's pain and grief and suffering. So like them, may we be strengthened by the knowledge that God is with us. May we stay awake in the face of suffering, compassionate to those who are in a moment of need. And may these stories and the hope of the resurrection that is to come give us hope and give us strength in our own moments of need. So may this be a blessed and holy week to come. I hope that you will join us again for another Facebook Live next week. God's peace be with you.